Imagine this, a billionaire, someone who has everything, publicly beats a beggar in broad daylight, throws him to the ground, laughs at him, spits on him. But what if everything changed after that? What if the beggar wasn't who he seemed to be? What if the tables turned and the powerful man learned just how wrong he was? What happens when the beggar's true identity is revealed? Can the world still look at the billionaire the same way? What happens when the weak become the strong? And what happens when those who seem untouchable finally get their comeuppance? The streets of New York City were as fast-paced as always. The sidewalks were packed with people hurrying to their next destination, all lost in their own worlds. Street vendors hawked their hot dogs and pretzels, and tourists snapped pictures of the towering skyscrapers. But amidst the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, David sat on the cold concrete sidewalk, his eyes downcast. He wasn't just sitting. He was begging. David had lived this life for longer than he cared to remember. His clothes were worn, tattered, and dirt-stained from years of exposure to the harsh realities of the streets. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He clutched a battered cup, hoping for any kind of change. A quarter, a dollar, maybe even just a smile. He hated the way people looked at him. The judgment in their eyes, the pity, the disgust. But he had learned to ignore it over the years. He didn't have a choice. He had nothing left but his pride, and even that was fading. As he stared down at the cup, hoping for a miracle, a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb, its engine growling like a predator closing in on its prey. The passenger door opened, and out stepped a man dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His shoes were polished to a shine, and the aroma of expensive cologne filled the air as he stepped onto the pavement. His name was Michael Lawson. Michael was the heir to one of the wealthiest families in America, a name known in every high-rise building and every boardroom in the city. He had power, money, and influence, and he knew it. To Michael, everyone else was beneath him, nothing more than a prop in his perfect little world. David looked up briefly, his eyes catching Michael's. He didn't ask for this. He didn't want to be noticed, but Michael locked eyes with him, and something in that look made David's stomach churn. Michael's gaze was cold, dismissive. He saw David as little more than a piece of garbage on the sidewalk. Well, what do we have here? Michael's voice was sharp, dripping with disdain. A beggar sitting on his high horse. David swallowed the lump in his throat but stayed silent. His pride kept him from speaking, from begging for mercy. He had no intention of begging for anything. Michael smirked, taking a step closer. Pathetic. You're really just sitting here begging for change like it's your job? People like you disgust me. Do you even know what it's like to work for anything? David clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. The anger built up inside him, but he bit his tongue. He wasn't going to let this arrogant man provoke him. He had been humiliated enough in his life. Without warning, Michael reached down and grabbed David by the collar, yanking him to his feet. "Get up, you lazy loser," he spat. "You think the world owes you something? You think you're entitled to a single dollar? What are you even doing with your life?" David's vision blurred for a moment as he was pulled to his feet. His legs wobbled, weak from hunger, but he stood his ground. "Let go of me," he said, his voice rough, strained. Michael's grip tightened. "What are you going to do? Cry?" He let out a cruel laugh. "You're worthless. You're nothing. Look at you. You can't even survive on the streets. Why don't you just do the world a favor and disappear?" David's heart raced. He felt every word like a physical blow. His chest tightened and his hands trembled. He wanted to fight back, to scream at Michael that he wasn't nothing. But the words caught in his throat. With a mocking sneer, Michael's hand swung through the air and struck David across the face. The slap echoed through the street. David's head snapped back, and for a split second he saw nothing but white. His body staggered, the force of the blow nearly knocking him to the ground. His cup, now empty, tumbled from his hands and rolled away. The world around him seemed to slow as he stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Blood welled in the corner of his mouth, and his cheek stung from the slap. But it wasn't just the physical pain that hurt. It was the humiliation. The realization that he had been reduced to this. A man once full of life and promise, now no more than a punching bag on the streets of the city that had once been his home. "Stay down, loser," Michael barked. "You don't deserve anything more than this." David collapsed back onto the sidewalk, unable to find the strength to get up. His whole body ached, and the tears he had been holding back finally slipped down his face. Not because he was weak, but because the world had beaten him down too many times. The injustice, the cruelty, it was more than he could take. Michael didn't even glance back as he turned and walked to his SUV. "Get a job, you worthless piece of shit," he muttered as the car door slammed behind him. The vehicle roared to life and sped off, leaving David lying there, humiliated and broken. The crowd around them had gathered, some watching with mild interest, some filming the scene on their phones, but no one intervened. No one cared. David lay on the sidewalk for a long time, staring up at the sky. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, his body still trembling from the pain and rage. But there was something else growing inside him now. A fire. A determination. He wasn't finished yet. Michael had no idea who he had just humiliated. He had no idea what David had been through or what he was capable of. David pushed himself to his feet, wiping the blood from his lip. It was time to rise. And when he did, he would make sure that Michael and the world would never forget who he was. The weeks following the humiliating encounter with Michael felt like an eternity for David. The pain from the slap had faded, but the weight of the public humiliation lingered. Every day he walked the same streets, passed the same people, and saw the same high-rise buildings that once represented his dream. The city had become a place of emptiness and mockery, a reminder of everything he had lost. But David had a plan. And it wasn't just about getting revenge on Michael, it was about taking back everything he had been denied. He spent the next few weeks disappearing into the shadows, carefully plotting his next move. The life he had once known, the wealth, the power, the connections, hadn't disappeared overnight. It had been stolen from him, hidden away by his stepmother after his father's mysterious death. But David was a patient man. He knew that in the world of money and power, things didn't change quickly. But when they did, they changed fast. David had spent years building a network of allies in the shadows, former employees of his father's businesses, old friends, and even enemies who owed him a favor. He knew exactly what he needed to do: infiltrate the industries Michael controlled, dismantle his empire piece by piece, and expose the truth. But there was one thing David needed to do first. He needed to reclaim his identity. One day, David received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was one he knew all too well. "David," the voice said, calm and measured. "It's time." David's heart skipped a beat. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice that had once belonged to his father's most trusted business associate. The man who had been with him through everything. David knew exactly what this call meant. He quickly responded, his voice steady. "I'm ready." The following week, David entered the high-rise building that housed his father's former empire. It was an imposing structure, gleaming with power, but to David, it felt like home. This was where he had grown up, where he had once walked with confidence, knowing that everything in the world was within his grasp. But now, as he stood at the entrance, all he could think about was how much he had been stripped of. "Mr. Westbrook will see you now," the receptionist said with a smile, but David barely noticed her. His thoughts were elsewhere, focused on what was about to unfold. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet space. He had walked these halls countless times as a child, but now, it felt like a stranger in his own home. As he entered the boardroom, he was met by a familiar face, Michael Lawson, sitting at the head of the table, as confident and arrogant as ever. David's heart tightened. It had been weeks since their last encounter, but seeing Michael sitting there, untouched, unbothered, was enough to spark a deep rage within him. Michael looked up, his eyes narrowing in confusion as he recognized David. He tried to mask his surprise with a smirk. "What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his tone dismissive. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up in a place like this. I thought you'd be busy begging on the streets, but here you are." David's gaze was cold, his composure unwavering. He stood tall, his posture firm. You don't know who you're dealing with, Michael, but you will soon. Michael laughed as though David were a joke. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. You're a nobody. A worthless beggar who couldn't even survive on the streets. David's jaw tightened. You're wrong, he said, his voice calm but dripping with contempt. I'm not the beggar you think I am. I'm not the man you humiliated. I'm someone far more powerful than you could ever imagine. Michael chuckled, clearly not believing him. And what? You think you're going to take me down? Do you even have a clue what you're up against? You don't belong here, David. You never will. David smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. You've made a grave mistake, Michael. You've been living in a world of lies, and it's about to come crashing down. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table in front of Michael. I've spent years gathering the pieces. I've infiltrated your companies, your investors, your businesses. Everything you've built will fall piece by piece. And I'll be the one to take it back. Michael's face paled as he flipped open the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. The truth was right in front of him. David had used his father's connections, his knowledge of the business world, to dig into Michael's past. Michael had been involved in illegal activities, fraud, money laundering, and corrupt deals, all of it documented in the folder before him. No, Michael whispered, his voice trembling. How did you? David leaned forward, his voice low but steady. It's over, Michael. Your empire is crumbling and you're going to watch it fall. I've been waiting for this moment for years and now it's finally here. You're nothing. You never were. Michael stood up abruptly, his fists clenched in anger. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll destroy you. David's gaze never wavered. You're already defeated. You just don't know it yet. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, public revelations, and the collapse of Michael's empire. The investors who had once pledged their loyalty to Michael now turned their backs on him, pulling their money from his ventures. The press was relentless, exposing the fraud and corruption that had long been hidden beneath the surface of Michael's polished exterior. David, on the other hand, became a symbol of power and resilience. He reclaimed his family's fortune, stepping into the role that had been rightfully his. He used the wealth and resources to rebuild the business, but not for personal gain. Instead, he reinvested it in the people, creating jobs, funding education, and supporting those who had once been discarded by society just like he had been. And as for Michael, he was left with nothing. The man who had once stood at the top of the world was now facing criminal charges, his name forever tarnished. He had been humbled, his arrogance shattered, and David stood victorious. David stood in front of the window of his new office, looking out over the city. It was a different view now. He had reclaimed what was rightfully his, and he had built something that would last far beyond the wealth and power of his enemies. The streets that had once been his prison were now just a distant memory. And as he looked out at the skyline, he realized that no matter how far he had fallen, he had always had the strength to rise again. What are your thoughts on this story? Please leave your comments, like and share this story to your loved ones.